Welcome to Module 2 of the Environment Agency BIM e-learning. In this module, you will learn about how to set up a project to be BIM compliant. To start with, we'll look at the suite of standards which are in place to govern BIM. PAS1192 and BS1192, the British standards that define what BIM means across the industry. The BIM Protocol, used to incorporate BIM in contracts, and the employer's information requirements, which contains the Environment Agency's minimum technical requirements for BIM. We'll look at mobilisation, or how to start a project to be BIM compliant. This will include an introduction to the tools we need to use to help us classify and manage data and information, the information delivery plan, and the common data environment. Then we'll cover the ways in which adopting BIM changes the way we tender work. We'll explain how to incorporate BIM into a single project tender and how to apply BIM in packages. And we'll also introduce the idea of plain language questions. BIM Standards. There are several industry standards that work together to define what BIM means. These set the framework on how to manage information and data throughout the asset lifecycle. Overarching everything, there's a group of British standards under the banner of BS1192. These are the rules of the game which define standard roles and processes for BIM. Underneath that, there is the BIM Protocol, which sets out a commercial approach for implementing BIM. And beneath that, there's the Environment Agency's employer information requirements. These three groups of documents are what define how BIM works. You don't need to know them in detail, but it's useful to know what they are. Let's have a closer look at them. BS1192 and PAS1192 are the British standards for BIM. This group of documents has been written by the British Standards Institution to define how BIM should work across the construction industry. Each of these documents deals with a specific part of information management. You don't need to know the details of what's in each document to use BIM. All you need to know is that they set out standard processes for managing information and data throughout the asset lifecycle. In other words, during design, build, commissioning, and operation of assets. These documents are free to download, and you can find them by visiting the British Standard Institution's website. The BIM Protocol was developed by the Construction Industry Council in 2013 and updated in 2018. It's a legal agreement which has been designed to be included with construction contracts in order to add BIM as a contractual requirement. In essence, it takes the roles, requirements, and processes that are described in BS1192 and PAS1192 Part 2 and creates contractual obligations on the employer and the supplier to undertake the roles and follow the processes. This means you can add BIM to the contract simply by referencing the BIM Protocol as an appendix. For Environment Agency contracts, the standard contract documents we use for most of our commissions have been updated to include a provision which attaches the BIM Protocol. The Employer's Information Requirements, or EIR, is the document which outlines how the EA as a client wish to receive information from our suppliers. In the EIR, we specify things like the file formats we want to receive information in, file naming convention, which roles we will take on in managing information and which the supplier will be responsible for, standard processes for managing information, for example, the use of IDP, standard codes, such as volumes, to be used on all EA projects, how items such as federated models should be handled, and so on. The EIR is a minimum technical requirement and is automatically included with all of our contract documents. Mobilisation, starting a BIM-compliant project. An important principle of BIM is that it covers information management for the whole life of an asset, from the initial concept stage, through design and construction, through to the eventual operational lifetime of the asset. To achieve this, we've introduced two new tools which will help you. The first is called the Common Data Environment, or CDE. The purpose of this is to provide a common place for data and information created throughout the asset lifecycle. At each stage, the project team uses the CDE to share the data and information they create in a structured, consistent manner. This stays in the CDE throughout the project, with each project stage building on what went before to create a full record of the asset. At the end of the project and the handover of the built assets, this data and information is then passed over to the operational team for them to use. The second tool is called the Information Delivery Plan, or IDP. This is a schedule of all the information and data produced by a project, and it's where we apply the structure which keeps everything in order. The IDP is designed to help you keep track of all the information and data that's already been delivered, and to help you plan what needs to be delivered as your project progresses. Together, these two tools are critical to implementing BIM in the Environment Agency. They are what allow us to manage data and information throughout the whole asset lifecycle, and to make sure that it's all stored in a consistent structure so that we can use it again in future. For this reason, it's crucial that you start a common data environment and an information delivery plan for your project as soon as it starts, so that all information and data is kept in a useful form. Now we've introduced the common data environment and the information delivery plan, let's have a look at them in more detail. We'll start with the information delivery plan. The Information Delivery Plan, or IDP, is a tool used to help project teams to track the information that is produced by the project. As such, it's two-pronged. For starters, it's used to track what information already exists in the project. For example, information that already existed when the project started, or that has been delivered by the supply chain through completed contracts. As well as recording what's been delivered, it's designed to help project teams to plan what information needs to be delivered in order to complete the project successfully, and to communicate this to suppliers. The idea is that throughout the project, we make sure we get the information we need to operate and maintain the assets once they're built. By working with the senior users to understand what these requirements are and adding them to the IDP, the project manager can make sure that the project delivers the right information and data. One of the principles of BIM is that information is received in a structured manner. The IDP helps the project team achieve this by generating BIM-compliant file names for all documents. These are generated according to rules set out in the EIR and BS1192. We'll look at the file name in more depth in the next e-learning module. There are some key features of the IDP that you need to understand. Each IDP is project-specific. They apply to one project. It's an end-to-end document. You have one IDP for the duration of the project. This means that you have a dashboard of all the information you've procured at all stages of your project. To this end, the IDP is laid out with all the project stages at the top of the page. You can indicate the outline program by adding delivery dates to the stages. You can also add the status of the stages to show which ones are completed, which is current, and which ones are still to complete. The IDP has a common format across the EA program. On the left side of the IDP page, you see a list of different types of information we typically procure. These are called deliverables. All EA projects use the same IDP template, so that information is categorised in the same way. This makes life easier for project teams. For example, if you're a project manager who has inherited a scheme from another PM, the IDP for that will be structured in the same way as any other IDP, meaning you've got one less thing to get to grips with. It also makes it easier to hand over information to operation teams at the end of a project, since they can expect to always receive information in a consistent structured format. It clearly shows who is responsible for producing information, so that suppliers, as well as the EA as employer, fully understand what they need to produce. Using the IDP is very simple. Remember, you have the deliverables on the left, types of information you want to procure, and you have stages at the top, when you want to procure them. So let's say you wanted to procure an environmental impact assessment, and you want this work to be done during the second stage. You show this by selecting the cell that intersects this row and column. The IDP tool will show you a dialog box, where you can add metadata to the deliverable. When you're done with this, you'll see the deliverable added under the stage column. This is called profiling a deliverable. This means you have specified a deliverable to be issued within a certain stage and started to profile it with metadata. At each stage of the project manager needs to make sure they profile out all the deliverables they want to receive. A good IDP contains a lot of detail about how information will be managed. Here is a summary of what you should look for. For each stage, the main supplier or intended framework has been nominated. At each stage, one supplier will be responsible for most of the deliverables. For example, you might have a certain consultant responsible for the design and a contractor who is carrying out construction. Under each of these stages, you would then name those suppliers as the default supplier. Stage statuses are added along with stage gateway dates. This shows at a glance the current state of the project, as well as key gateways. Files from previous stages have been added. The supplier deliverables for the current stage are accurately profiled. Remember that some deliverables will be supplied by the Environment Agency. For example, by specialist teams, or if you're gathering data and information at the start of a project before commissioning a supplier. These need to be added to the IDP as well. It's for managing all data and information, not just that which we receive from suppliers or third parties. See that delivery notes have been added where appropriate, to provide extra detail for anyone using the IDP. Going into lots of detail about how to add all these is beyond the scope of this e-learning, so additional guidance can be found in the IDP user guide, included in the course notes. Now you've seen how the information delivery plan is used to schedule information and data, we'll look at how the common data environment is used to transfer and store them. Let's look at how things worked before BIM. Imagine that the Environment Agency has appointed two suppliers to work on a project, one to do the design and the other to carry out construction. Each supplier has their own local storage for information, and information exchange is by a variety of methods. Sometimes email is used, sometimes smoke signals, maybe semaphore, you name it. And whenever one of these parties receives information, they save it somewhere in their file store. For example, let's say the EA issued a report to both suppliers. It's saved on the EA server as one thing, but both suppliers rename it to something else when they receive it. Here's the first problem. There's no agreed structure. This means that over time you might end up with the same file saved in lots of places with lots of different file names. Or even worse, you might end up with it saved nowhere you can get to it. The problem is you wouldn't easily know, and it makes it very hard to find things in the future. Now imagine supplier A, the designer, issues a drawing to the EA. The EA likes this and issues it to supplier B, the builder. But this was only an early draft, and in the meantime the designer has issued a second revision to correct some errors. Without good version control, how do you know whether the file you're looking at is the most recent version? And similarly, because everyone is working disparately, this process is reliant on informal processes. Supplier B may never get the drawing. For example, if the EA project manager is on leave, and supplier A has no way of knowing. These problems make it harder to hand over information to the owner when the project is finished, because there's no clear way to know what information exists. BIM solves this by introducing a common data environment. Now the employer workspace becomes much more important for transferring information and data between the parties. As with the system we used before, it's a common environment. All the key suppliers have access to it. All information and data published to the Environment Agency as the employer is transmitted to this CDE. So it's called an employer CDE. This environment is linked to the IDP. So it has a structure which dictates how things are referenced in the workspace. It also has a process for validating files which makes sure that people only ever work from the most recent information. So, for example, when supplier A wants to share a document with the rest of the team, they simply add it to the CDE with a BIM-compliant file name. The EA project manager, as the employer, will validate it, and then if supplier B wants to reference the document, they can access it directly from the CDE. With the CDE, files have a consistent naming structure, which makes it easy to search for information. This means that when the project's products are handed over, we can make sure that all the right information is handed over with it. Under BIM, the supply chains still maintain their own common data environments. They use these to work on things before they issue them to the Environment Agency, and to collaborate with their supply chain. The difference with BIM is that everyone uses the BIM naming convention, with the metadata defined in the Information Delivery Plan, and that transferring data and information only happens via the Environment Agency CDE. The EA CDE is called the ECDE, or Employers Common Data Environment, and the supply chain CDEs are called SCDEs, or Supplier Common Data Environment. Another new feature of these common data environments is the addition of status codes to show the suitability of files for different kinds of use. For example, to differentiate between information that's been validated and that which has not. In Module 3 of this e-learning, we'll discuss these statuses further, what they mean and how to use them when managing a CDE. Used together, the Common Data Environment and the Information Delivery Plan save time over the lifetime of the project by making sure that data and information are classified correctly as they're delivered. This helps the project go more smoothly, as it provides a clear view of what data and information has been delivered, what's left, and who is responsible for it. They also simplify the handover phase, as all data and information will be delivered in a structured, ordered manner that makes it easy for the asset owner to use it in the future. The CDE and IDP should be created right at the start of the project, populated with all relevant data and information that is already available, and with as much detail as possible of what the project will need to deliver. Then, during the rest of the project, they need to be kept up to date and used to manage the data and information produced by the project. Now we'll take a look at what needs to be included in our contract documents to communicate BIM requirements to the supply chain. Let's remind ourselves how we tendered work before the days of BIM. In the beginning, the Environment Agency project team creates the tender pack. This includes the scope or works information, the contract data, and any other terms to be included in the contract. This gets sent to the supply chain and the tender period begins. By the end of the tender period, we will hopefully receive some bids from suppliers interested in carrying out the work. At this point, the EA project team reviews the tenders, picks their preferred supplier, and appoints them to do the work. Introducing BIM into the mix changes that process in a few ways. BIM is about better information, so we change the tender process so that the employer and supplier explicitly state what information is to be created and how it is to be managed. For starters, we add the Information Delivery Plan to the tender packs as part of the work's information or scope. This shows the information and data that we already have for the project, and shows the prospective suppliers the information and data that we're asking them to deliver. Our contract documents have also been amended to incorporate the CIC BIM Protocol. This, along with the IDP, forms the contractual basis for BIM in the eventual commission. Then, as part of the tender return, we received a marked-up copy of the IDP, along with something called a pre-award BIM execution plan, or pre-BEP. We'll go into detail about these in the next module, but they tell us how the supplier will deliver and manage information for the project if they are awarded the contract. Before the contract award, the winning supplier and the EA agree the final IDP to confirm exactly what will be delivered in the contract. Then BIM adds 2 elements that the supplier needs to deliver within 6 weeks of contract award, which define how they will manage the delivery of information. These are the Master Information Delivery Plan, MIDP, and the Post-Award BIM Execution Plan, or Post-BEP. These project levels BEPs are both supported by framework level BEPs, which define how a supplier will generally manage information across the framework. We'll discuss BEPs, marked up IDPs, and MIDPs in detail in the next module. It's important to note that if you're delivering work through a framework where a regional preferred supplier has already been nominated, such as a program delivery unit or the collaborative delivery framework, then the process for BIM doesn't fundamentally change. Under these arrangements, we still need to issue the supplier with a scope or works information document to form the contract. So the IDP needs to be provided along with this. We also need to make sure that the contract includes the standard BIM clause, to include the CIC BIM Protocol. Similarly, the proposal we receive from the supplier needs to include a pre-BEP and marked up IDP, which are developed into the post-BEP and master IDP once the contract is formally awarded. The IDP plays a crucial role during the tender process. It's a common thread which is updated by the employer and the supplier throughout. But the IDP is not just something produced for the tender process. It exists for the whole life of the project and is used during stage delivery to help deliver information in a structured manner. The IDP is created right at the beginning of the project and is built up throughout the project. Then, when the project's products are eventually handed over to their owner, the IDP is also handed over and used during the operation and maintenance phase of the asset lifecycle. This way, all the information relating to the assets created by the project are handed over in a structured, consistent manner, which makes it easy to find and use the information when needed. BIM is about making sure that we collect information in a structured manner. That is, the information that we need to operate and maintain the assets that we build. To achieve that, BIM introduces something called Plain Language Questions, or PLQs. These are a set of questions asked at the end of each stage to check that the right information has been gathered to progress to the next stage of the project. For EA projects, there are PLQs asked after stages 1 to 6, as shown by the diamonds on the IDP. The PLQs are answered by specific deliverables. For example, in the project startup phase, one of the PLQs is, has the study area been defined? You can tell the IDP that this will be answered by the deliverable A0100, called Extent and Boundaries. As information is delivered by the project, the IDP is able to cross-check to see if anything has been published to this deliverable. And when it has, it will link to this as the PLQ answer. This has 2 advantages. Firstly, if all projects answer the same questions, then we can assure that all projects will deliver the information we need. Secondly, this can really aid gateway reviews by highlighting when all information has been collected, and conversely by flagging what information is missing. This will help project boards to make an informed decision on whether the gateway has been passed. The Environment Agency EIR states that all capital works must include a federated 3D model of the assets that are being built. This means that in your tender documents and on the IDP, you need to make clear the extent and level of definition needed for your model. For operational works, a 3D model is optional. For these commissions, you need to decide whether or not the 3D model will be beneficial, considering the project as well as the whole life operation and maintenance of the asset. For guidance on this, your local BIM lead will be able to help you. BIM and packaged projects. In the first e-learning module, we learned that a key goal of BIM is to ensure that asset data and information is captured consistently throughout a project, so that it can be used later on in the operation and maintenance phase. The goal of packaging during projects is to combine the contracts for work being done on several projects into one, to make tendering and delivery of the work more efficient. Packaging arrangements typically combine projects at a similar stage. For example, packaging together the appraisal stage of a number of projects. These arrangements also typically persist only for a single stage. Once the work on our theoretical appraisal package is complete, the package is finished, and the projects in that package could be packaged differently in the next stage. Putting these ideas together, we can see what we need to achieve when incorporating BIM into packages. We need to ensure that we maintain continuity of information and data across different project stages and through different packages. We need to do this whilst making the most of the efficiencies we can gain by packaging projects together. To explain how this is achieved, we'll look at how BIM needs to be handled for individual projects in a package, and what can be handled at the package level, across all the projects in a package. Looking at the projects in a package, each project individually needs to be set up with the tools you'll use to implement BIM. This means that each project needs its own employer common data environment to store and transfer all the data and information produced during the package for use in later project stages, its own IDP, prepared by the Environment Agency. Based on this, the supplier needs to create their MIDP for the project, and a single volume and location strategy for the project. These items need to be produced for every project, whether or not they're packaged. These will enable you to manage the data and information produced on the project, and ensure that it persists to later project stages through to the eventual handover of the asset. At the package level, the supplier needs to issue pre- and post-award BIM execution plans, or BEPs, which cover the entire package, rather than a single plan per project. We'll talk more about BEPs in Module 3, but broadly speaking, they describe how a supplier will manage data and information in delivering their work to us. You also have the option to create a package-level CDE. This must only be used to help manage the package. Anything relating to the projects or containing asset information must be transferred via projects CDEs. If you decide that you want a package CDE, then you'll also need a package-level IDP and MIDP. And you need to identify someone who is involved with the package to manage all these things. We would recommend not creating a package workspace unless you're sure you really need it. So, in summary, projects always need to have their own employer common data environment and information delivery plan. You can create a package-level CDE and IDP for package administration if you wish. However, this requires someone from the Environment Agency who is involved with the package to manage both these things. And finally, BIM execution plans should be produced at the package level, so that producing these documents is more efficient across the package. This concludes Module 2 of the Environment Agency's BIM e-learning. In this module, you've learned about the industry standards which define BIM, BS1192 and PAS1192. You've learned that the BIM Protocol is used to incorporate BIM into contracts, and that the Environment Agency's employer information requirements set out the minimum technical standards for BIM at the EA. You've learned about how to mobilise a project in a BIM-compliant way by making sure you start an employer's common data environment and information delivery plan as soon as the project starts. You've also learned how these tools work together to help us classify and manage data and information across the asset lifecycle. Finally, you've learned how to apply BIM in a tender pack by including a completed IDP and the BIM protocol in the contract documents. You've learned how plain language questions help us to plan for and then manage stage boundaries. And you've learned that with packaging arrangements, you still need project-level CDEs and IDPs, but that BIM execution plans can be managed at the package level. There will now be a short test of what you've learned in this module. To pass, you need to score at least 70% overall. Good luck!